Hey guys, it's Ryan. It's me, Ryan. Your friend, your pal, your stranger whose video you've discovered and are about to click off of, even though it would upset me very much if you did. Now, I played Mafia Definitive Edition. Now, I know Mafia Definitive Edition has been out since September, so what could I possibly have to add to the discussion around this game? I don't know. Consider this a partway critique, partway my rambling, unfocused thoughts on my time with it. Before we do anything else, I am contractually obligated by the YouTube algorithm to encourage you to subscribe and spread the good word of the channel. It is Super Ryan Games, or just call me Idiot for short. That was a joke, but I guess if you took it seriously, then that says more about me than it does about you, huh? Now, let's get into the actual content here. My final thing before I jump in is there won't be any spoilers for the story here, but I may allude to certain concepts and vaguely reference certain directions the story takes that you may or may not consider it a spoiler depending on your own definition of what is a spoiler. Either way, here we go, you have been warned. Mafia Definitive Edition is a remake of the 2002 game developed by Illusions Softworks, later 2K check. I think I said that right. Later absorbed and merged into the current Mafia developer Hangar 13. To give you my Mafia game credentials here so you don't think I'm just making it up, and also to be as clear as possible on my perspective so you can see why I felt the way I did about Mafia Definitive Edition. I played Mafia 2 years ago on my Xbox 360. I thought the story was great, the characters included, though the world was gorgeous rather, it felt lacking activity or anything meaningful to do other than a hunt for achievements or collectibles, and I did. I'm kind of a simp for achievements and trophies. But I enjoyed Mafia 2 for what it was, enough to purchase Mafia 3, which I played about 3 years ago. Mafia 3, that is. Mafia 3 featured a phenomenal story as well. One of the big things it did address in relation to Mafia 2 is the lack of content outside of the story. However, it introduced another problem entirely. Mafia 3's content was just so repetitive, it was in effect, for lack of a better way of describing it, boring. It made going from story mission to story mission kind of repetitive. It's sad because Mafia 3 featured a great protagonist, a well-rounded cast, and was super interesting, but its gameplay loop failed to inspire me to continue to play the game outside of its story. So you see the issue, where Mafia 2 lacked much of the content for its open world, Mafia 3 had much more of it, but it was not fun or interesting to play, so I didn't want to explore it any more than I had to. I could probably do a whole other video on why open world games such as these, if you want to call them that, though I believe they're referred to more as like an action adventure title, but I digress. Open world games in general are just not as exciting to me anymore and haven't been for some time, but we're gonna stick to Mafia here. Now, to be clear again, I liked Mafia 2 and Mafia 3, even with those flaws that I mentioned. In comes Mafia Definitive Edition. I have not played Mafia 1 before, so this is entirely new to me. I have finally come full circle and finished all the Mafia games, or at least all of the modern day Mafia games. I didn't go back and play 1, but I already told you that. So I was just curious to see what approach Hangar 13 would take with the remake. Would it be in the same vein of the first game, but just new assets, which has happened before? Or would it be reminiscent of the essentially barren open world of 2? Or would it have the tedium of 3? Or maybe it'd be a mixture of both? The answer is 2. It has the same issue that Mafia 2 has. Craft a gorgeous open world that legit has just nothing to do in it. That is probably partially my fault, I suppose. I should know not to approach these games as true open world games, and much more like action adventure games with a large open map. I should do that, but it's puzzling to me then why the game has a free roam mode when there's not much going on in the world to do or see beyond running around the map for collectibles, but more on that later. I don't want to rail on the game just for that one thing that kind of annoys me, but it's emblematic of, I think, some of the flaws in this title generally. The story, for example, is very good, but a lot of the characters are just very underwritten. You can chalk this up to it being a fairly faithful remake of a 2002 game, but to my knowledge, they said at least they expanded parts of the story and added more to it. This is not a simple remaster, of course, it's a remake in every possible way it could be. New assets and gameplay improvements alike, new cutscenes, new voice actors even. For example, Tommy, the main character, we see glimpses of him having heart and empathy, but it's hard for me to get past the fact that he's just kind of does whatever he's told or whatever is asked of him with no questioning of why or how, until a pivotal story moment towards the end that I won't spoil here, but until then he just goes along to get along. I guess depending upon the response to this video, I could do a whole spoiler filled video on my nitpicks with the game's story, but I digress. Without mentioning names, there's other characters too that just kind of go along with everything, and then the story just randomly changes course towards the end. I say that as someone who liked the characters too and their relationships to one another, but it could be a bit thin. It felt that way, and it didn't really, for me, go deeper into the characters and who they were, enough for me to really be engaged in what was going on entirely. Again, to reiterate, not that the story's bad, it's actually better than average, I wanted more from it. And of course, without a competent voice cast, your story is not going to go anywhere. Thankfully, Mafia Definitive Edition has above average performances.
Well, you gonna come in and take a load off or what?
Been wondering when you'd invite me up.
And every dog in town had a turn. You're like that dog, Tommy. Every time you flash your money around, you're a bitch in heat. And everyone in that club is now looking to fuck you. And once you get fucked, you're no good to us. Do you understand?
You made your point.
Good.
Andrew Bongiorno brings a nervousness to Tommy and adds depth to a character that I argue needed some more development in a lot of areas, but he struggles to rationalize some of the darker things he has to do, and Bongiorno does it pretty well. Jeremy Luke as Paulie brings out the sadness behind such an affable character in one particular scene for me, which is a highlight. Speaking of the highlights, the final highlight for me is Don DiPetta. I think I said it right. I always get people's names wrong, and then I'm worried that they're gonna find me and kill me. I don't think they will. Anyway, Don DiPetta as Sam, whose performance gives nuance to what could have been a typical cliche mob drama role. Does that make sense? The rest of the voice cast does an exceptional job of elevating what I did describe as sometimes a thin script. Something I thought was very noticeable with headphones, where it made me even think like, wow, these characters are very breathy. Hey, Tommy, you know what I was thinking, Tommy? Tommy. Why do I keep saying Tommy? I don't know, but that's all I heard when I had my headphones on. I'm gonna try and play a clip here so you can see what I'm talking about, and you might need headphones for this part.
Hey, here for some heaters, Tom?
Nah, I'm already going and healed. Paulie and me, we gotta give a beating to some punks who've been on our turf. I don't want to pull this and piss in our own street. There's something to bust heads. That's all we need.
Sam turned over some guy's warehouse and, autographed by Babe Ruth himself, the guy said. I mean, that's horse shit, but they bust heads. Your punks won't have time for questions.
Not I won't. Thanks, Vinny.
But as a disclaimer, it could just be that I'm hypersensitive to it. As someone who can be very breathy when doing voiceover, I spend at least an hour or two per video editing out all the most egregious of my breathing. You're welcome. Of course, it's not as bad as when you listen without headphones, to be fair. Furthermore, I did like the soundtrack, and again, I don't know if it's me, but I sometimes feel soundtracks are mixed to be at the same or similar level to dialogue in scenes, so it can be a little distracting. In the beginning, in particular, there was one scene where I think it was like that stereotypical mob movie scene that they always mimic of the trumpet playing very loudly over the scene and you're just kind of very distracted. You can't hear the dialogue. That's exactly how it felt. And I had to lower the music volume because I could just not hear anyone. But then again, you're looking at the same guy who goes to a concert and doesn't understand how anybody can even hear anything at the concert because it just sounds like a bunch of instruments playing all at the same time at the same level, and who can even hear the vocalists? People singing along and I'm looking at them like, come on, man. It'll go something like this.
So basically, Vinny comes up to Ralphie and says, you want to go for a ride? And Vinny says, yeah, sure, I'll go. What else am I going to do? Say no? How could I say no to you, right, Vinny? So they go for a ride, and Vinny says to Ralphie, you know I asked you out here, right? And Ralphie says, I know, Vinny, I know. Vinny is all confused, and he says, Ralphie, no, then why did you play a come with me? Ralphie doesn't even turn to her and keeps his eyes fixed on the road. He says, because I'll never run from you. So I'm not even gonna bother you. It's been a long time coming. We never saw Ralphie again after that.
Just to be clear, I made all that up. That is not from anything. Old-timey sounding tunes from the radio and big orchestral dramatic flair, and Mafia Definitive Edition does have a good soundtrack. I noticed Mafia didn't have the expansive gameplay options of other games, which is fine, but missions generally just have you driving, shooting, or driving and shooting. If it wasn't solid, it would be more of a problem, at least for me, but it's not overall. The shooting works pretty well, if not a bit clunky when trying to get in and out of cover or rotate around cover. Camera can be a bit janky as you continue to view various enemy positions and whatnot. The enemies themselves are fine, but they don't really offer you much variety, which is forgivable, I suppose, considering the main story is only about 8 to 10 hours long, but they are just not aggressive in the slightest at times, often staying in cover and refusing to move, but then they move up randomly at other times. There's no real consistency to the AI here. It just seems like a few guys were nervous and grabbed some guns and asked, "Hey, go and kill that dude quick." And they failed. At times you do have AI companions with you, and predictably, they're kind of useless. They just shoot at nothing constantly all the time. And look, I kind of understand why developers are afraid to make AI companions too intelligent, make them too smart, and they just do the job for the player, make them too dumb, and I waste time in my video, like right now, complaining about it. Again, as I mentioned, the majority of your time in game is spent shooting and driving or just sneaking around with some half-baked sneaking mechanic that feels like it was a vague attempt at trying to mix it up, but it wasn't fully realized here. And the driving, I just hated it. I can't and won't defend it. Look, I'm not from the 1930s. It's evidenced by the fact that I am not over 100 years old, so maybe someone can correct me here, but I don't recall it being documented in history how a lot of cars drifted and swerved and fishtailed all over the roads in the 30s. I do take the point that I was often traveling at high speed, so that could be why, but regardless, I stand by the fact that I hate the driving in this game. It almost feels like Hangar 13 knew people would not like to drive because you could switch off a setting that enables the ability to skip certain drives that are not necessarily for the plot. A friend of mine informed me after I had scripted this section of the video that driving was very much a crapshoot in the 30s, so I guess it's technically accurate, but it angers me nonetheless. That race in Chapter 5. The other thing, again, is there's nothing to do in this world except get collectibles. And let me tell you, folks, I hate collectibles. Not because I'm opposed to the concept, but I just feel they generally are not done right. Here you have a bunch of, yes, thematically consistent pulp magazines and cars to collect, but for what purpose? This is not necessarily a knock against Mafia, such as it is one against a general feeling of tedium when it comes to collectibles and games. I know you'll say, Ryan, just don't go for the collectibles. But in a game with such a large, vibrant world, I wanted to see if I can get some enjoyment out of it. Especially in Mafia, it's not like you can read the magazines or anything or get some world building or lore from them. They're just kind of lying around. And even then, I would not even mention it if there were, say, like 50 collectibles, but then there's over 100 of them in the game to collect for seemingly no reason other than to just be like, hey, that's cool, ain't it? What do you think? And you're just like, I guess, yeah. That didn't stop me from getting them all, though, of course, because, apparently I'm a crazy bastard. Just because a game has lore building collectibles, that does not mean that it's fun. I'm more talking about how there's collectibles just randomly dispersed throughout in an almost aggressive way to the point where it feels like it's just there to randomly fill out the experience or extend the longevity of a game. I could go on and on about collectibles in games, but I'll save your ears for something less painful. Visually overall, I think the game looks really good and the environment's detailed and even the motion capture is really great at times. Sometimes animations felt a little stiff by modern day standards, but never in an outright offensive or bad way, just more in the way of awkwardly fumbling around corners and covers, such as I mentioned earlier. Mafia Definitive Edition is, in my opinion, a fun and overall worthwhile title. I often worry sometimes when I heavily criticize certain aspects of a game, it gives the impression that I'm telling you to steer clear of it, and I'm not. Maybe you've played it and agree with me, or maybe you don't agree. Please let me know in the comments below. I love the discourse and discussion. My main issue, and I guess conversely, my main compliment to Mafia Definitive Edition is the way which it just is laser focused on only doing one thing. It doesn't try to be this grand sprawling open world title with tons of things to do and see, like say a Grand Theft Auto, but at the same time for me, that's its greatest drawback. I want to see more going on in this world. A prime example of what I mean is if you go into free ride mode, the game's free roaming mode, you'll see all the characters from the main game in their respective locations, but they don't interact with you. If you walk up to them, they don't say or do anything. They just kind of exist in the world statically and unmoved by your presence. Again, I acknowledge that's probably my fault for going and thinking these games are open world games when they're more like action adventure games that kind of toil with the open world framework. I just don't see why you would create a large open world and then put nothing in it beyond the story, because it's a gorgeous open world that begs you to explore it. But when you realize there's really nothing to see, it's kind of moot. Is that the right word? So yeah, I played Mafia Definitive Edition. It's a good game, and if you want a game with a good story and some solid shooting mechanics, this is your title. You want something a bit more open, akin to GTA? Also, yeah, that driving is just legit terrible. Anyway, that's my thoughts on Mafia Definitive Edition. If you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I can make more like it. Even if you don't, I probably will continue to make more like it. But still, give it a thumbs up too if you enjoyed it, and if you don't or didn't, give it a thumbs down. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. I love you all, and I'll see you later.